Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my board gaming vlog, and we're looking at my top 100 tabletop games, dice games, card games, board games. I'm not including any of my own games in this list, but we're looking at games that I have found an emotional connection to, games where I get an emotional reaction when I look at them, games that fill me with joy or have a place in my heart, or where I have really fond memories of them. Whether they are good games or bad games doesn't really matter. The key thing is, do I love these games? And so number 30 on the list, today we're looking at 30 to 21, and number 30 is my number one game of the year for 2020, and that's Isle of Cats. So Isle of Cats is a polyomino game, a game where you're placing Tetris type pieces representing cute little cats onto a ship in order to transport them off this island. It's got card drafting in it, where you're picking up cards and then passing them on to the other players, and then you've got to pay for these cards using fish. So you've got a little bit of currency going on, and then you're placing them into your ship to try and cover up certain areas, fill out rooms. You want to cover up rats, which are going to be worth negative points, but also the cards that you've drafted are going to give you scoring opportunities at the end of the game for gathering certain types of sets and things like that. And also they're going to give you special actions that you can play. So there's a good deal going on in Isle of Cats. Lots of Tetris type games around. This is not the easiest of the bunch. You know, we've talked previously about the game Patchwork. That's a really easy polyomino game. This one's got a little bit more going on, and I think it's delightful. It's so beautifully illustrated, such a nice production. I've played this a lot with my wife through lockdown, you know, that early lockdown in March, April, May sort of time in 2020. We played Isle of Cats a lot. We'd sit out in the garden and play it on the garden table, and it really helped getting through those early sort of weeks. So I have a real fondness for the game, and I think we'll continue to play it for a long time to come. It's certainly one of my wife's very favourite games at this point. Number 29 is an unusual game. This is the game Serrano, which is a party game from Repos. And I don't think Serrano will ever get produced again. That's my gut feeling. Serrano is a rhyming game. So it's a game where you've got to write poems. I mean, that sounds awful, doesn't it? But you get that is essentially what you have to do. You get given a rhyme scheme. So each time it'll say, first line has to end with this, second line has to end with this particular sound, and then it'll give you a topic. And then you've got to write a little ditty, a little sort of 4-line poem. So everyone sits down and writes it quietly, and then you all reveal your poems and read them out to each other. And you're looking for obscure words. You score for having words at the end of your end of the sentences which no one else has used. But you also score for writing good poems. You will vote on which are the best poems. And I honestly think this game is hilarious. It's obviously not for everybody. Not everybody wants to sit around and write silly poems. But if you can find a group that is not, who is not inhibited in that way, who is happy to make kind of a fool of themselves, happy to do it badly, because inevitably, of course, we're all going to write terrible poems if we just sitting around writing them under pressure, knowing that you're competing with other people and trying to use obscure words. They're going to be weird poems, but they are hilarious. They inevitably end up being really rude and silly. I love to keep the poems that have been written. I can't see that this is a marketable game. I can't see that this is ever going to sell a ton, and so that's why I say I don't think it'll probably ever see the light of day again. But it's a perfect game for me. I really enjoy that sort of thing, sitting down and writing a silly poem and then reading it out to everyone else and listening to what they've come up with. Just great fun. So that's Serrano. Number 28 on the list is Cusco, which used to be called Java in a previous edition. I think Cusco was the original name and theme that the designer wanted, but it was changed by Rio Grande to Java, and so now it's with Super Meeple and it's gone back to the name Cusco. This is an action point game. It's in the same series as the game Tikal, which we've talked about previously, from Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling. There's quite a lot going on in Cuzco. You're layering up the board. I love that, the different layers as you lay tiles on top of each other and you create these hills and valleys in there, and then you're trying to get your people high up on those hills, and they're going to score better for you if they're in the higher positions. But you've also got to control majorities around these various sort of can't remember what they are now. Are they temples or cities or something like that? You can have festivals in the game. It's a bit more complex than Tikal. It's quite cutthroat. Lots of scope in this for what we call analysis paralysis, where players sit around and take ages to think about their turn while everyone else just sits and thinks, get on with it. You know, lots of scope for that. So you want to pick your players carefully when you're playing games of Cusco or indeed Tikal. But this is a game that really connected with me quite early in its original Java edition. It really connected with me quite early in my sort of hobby experience, you know, of collecting these sort of games. I thought it was great, you know, and now this Cuzco edition from Super Meeple, again, just fantastic components, and it just looks brilliant. So I've got a huge fondness for the entire trilogy, but Cuzco is my favourite of the Mask trilogy from Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling. Number 27 is Lost Cities, a two-player card game where we have a series of different colours, and each player is going to play cards against the different colours. So you're attempting missions by going to these colours, adventures. And you're using a shared deck of cards. So if I'm scoring quite well in one colour by placing different coloured cards of different values on there, then it's likely that the other player has not got many of that cards. So they're going to have to decide, is it worth them going on that adventure at all? Because if you score low, you actually get negative points. You've got to score at least 20 points before you get into positive scoring. So it's better actually to not bother at all, because then you'll get 0 points. 0 points is fine, but as soon as you put a single card down there, let's say I put down a 5, well, now I'm scoring minus 15 points because I've got to get to 20 before I get into the positives. So it's better not to go on that mission at all. And that's the really intriguing bit about Lost Cities, is deciding how thinly do I spread myself over those missions, or do I just focus on one or two of them where I know I can score really high but leave all the others at 0. It's a really nice head-to-head. It's quite a lot of luck in it in terms of the card draw and things like that, but it doesn't matter. It's a quick sort of card game. It's a bit of a classic, this, from Reiner Knizia. Other good ones in this genre are Shot and Totten, or Battle Line, also by Reiner Knizia, and Hanamikoji, which we've talked about previously. This genre of games, and particularly Lost Cities and Battle Line, are the inspiration for my game Compromat, which is a blackjack game where you're playing hands of blackjack against another player, two-player card game where you're competing on various different missions. So I'm really fond of this genre of games, and there aren't that many entries into this style of game. There's a handful of them that you can get, but Lost Cities is right at the top of that list. Number 26 is the pirate game, Libertalia. In this game, each player has a hand of cards, which is each round, and it's going to be identical for every player. You take the same characters from the deck, and every player gets those same characters. And you're going to choose one of those characters and play it simultaneously with everybody else. And then depending on what you've picked, your actions are going to occur in a specific order. So you're going to steal things from other players, you're going to take the loot in the middle of the board, do various different things based on those simultaneously chosen cards. But at the end of the round, you can have a few left over, and then they're going to be topped up, the same cards topped up for every player. So going into the second round, you might have a slightly different hand to everybody else, because you'll have kept slightly different characters to the ones that other people, because you've chosen to use different ones. And so gradually you start to diverge from the other players as you go through the game. This really is one of the best, if not the best, simultaneous action selection games. Games where we all sort of play a card together and then reveal at the same time. Those games can be quite frustrating, because obviously if you, through no fault of your own, you choose the same as somebody else and then nobody gets it, or you have to share the loot while somebody else goes off and gets loads, it never feels particularly fair. But Libertalia gets away with that quite well. Everybody seems to get something, do quite well, and the powers on the cards are really intriguing and fun. Every game's different because you're using different characters in each round. And so it's a really good game. It got quite a buzz when it came out. I think it was 2012, something like that. But it was only with a small publisher, and it's kind of disappeared over the years since. This is it absolutely, desperately needs a reboot, to be re-released with another publisher, because it could be really big. It's a fantastic game. It could do with expansions and all that sort of stuff. But for now, it might be a bit tricky to find. But if you can get hold of a copy, it's well worth it. That's Libertalia. Number 25 is St. Petersburg. Now, St. Petersburg is a card game, a card drafting game. You're buying cards, and then these cards are going to continuously give you stuff. So every round there's a certain thing that generates stuff. So some rounds will generate your production cards will generate, and they'll give you whatever they give you, victory points or money or whatever. Others, your characters will generate whatever they generate, or your locations will generate. And this goes on predictably from round to round, and you're going to gather up those cards and try and buy better and better cards from the display before the other players. And ultimately you're trying to attract all these noble characters who are going to score you loads of points for having sets of different types of nobles. It's paced a bit like a deck builder. This is an engine builder through and through. So you're buying up these cards and your rounds are getting better and better. You're generating better and better income that allows you to buy better and better cards, and so on and so forth. The original edition of the game has this really weird art style. It looks almost like, slightly childish, the way that the pictures have been drawn. But it's very, very charming. There's an expansion which makes things just that little bit more interesting. And then there was a big reboot, a sort of crowd-funded reboot with, fancy new artwork and loads of little mini expansions and things. And I got all excited and backed it. Then when this arrived, I sold off while I was waiting for it, I sold off my old copy with this weird artwork. And when the new one arrived, actually I didn't like it at all. The artwork was really generic and boring. It looked like loads of other games, but it wasn't even that well done when you looked really closely to it. And I really wished I had my old quirky version, so I ended up having to go out and spend a lot of money to get a copy of this now long out of print original version of St. Petersburg. But I'm really pleased that I did, because I love that game. I love that copy of that game. That edition of that game. But even in the new edition, if you can get past the slightly dull artwork, it's a fantastic game. And actually some of those little mini expansions and things that were included were quite interesting. I like the basic game, but you could do worse than picking up a copy of whichever edition you can get hold of. Number 24 is the game Bandu, or sometimes it's called Bausack. Now, Bandu and Bausack is essentially a game where you stack up a whole bunch of blocks of different shapes, and it's originally from Zoc Verlag, this game. It's got tons of different interesting shapes. I really like these wooden shapes, but they do just feel like they've picked up a bunch of pieces off the floor of a carpenter's workshop and stuck them in a box. It's very similar to the game Junkart, which came much later, and Bandu, to be honest, I don't even play it with its original rule set. I play it with an ultra simple rule set that I found online, because to me the most fun thing in this game is just stacking up the pieces. Bandu's got a whole auction thing where you've got to you select a piece and then you auction it off to the various different players. And I can imagine that works fine. Junkart, a very similar game, and this one's full of lots of different variant rules. So every round you play with a different rule set. You draw a card and it tells you how to play the game. But I like the simplicity of just one rule set, a simple rule set, and that's how I play Bandu. I tend to go for Bandu over Junkart. I think the pieces are just a bit bigger and chunkier, and it feels all just a little bit more dramatic. But I can't really fault Junkart. I like the big wooden box that it comes in. This is from the same publishers and same publishers as Flick 'em Up. I don't think it's the same designers. But it's again a sort of toy box full of building blocks to play with. Yeah, I mean that's it. I'm not. I shouldn't criticise the rule set in Bandu. Actually, there are multiple different rule sets in the game Bandu as well, and the simplest rule set in there is very similar to the rules that I play. So I suppose I'm playing with house rules, really. But it is a game that I've never seen go over badly. Everybody's always enjoyed it, and it's a game where everyone always ends up getting their mobile phones out and taking photos of these towers that they've created. I don't know why they do it, as if anyone else is going to be interested in looking at their photograph of a tower. I do it myself, though. I always end up going, oh, wow, look what I've built. Snap, 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 take pictures of it. It's weird why people do that. But it is something where you build something and you feel so proud, of what you've achieved. I really like that. I found this game always goes over well. So Bandu or Junkart, doesn't matter which one you get, but my preferred option is Bandu. You'll get it cheaper. It's a sort of become a bit of a bargain basement game, I guess, because Junkart has kind of superseded it, really. Number 23 is the game Grand Austria Hotel. This is a a proper Euro game. I haven't had many of them on the list, have I, so far? So this is a proper strategy game where you're trying to draft cards. You're having to supply them with various things, whether that's coffee or wine or cake or whatever, in order to persuade them to stay in your hotel, and you're having to allocate them to a certain room, and you're trying to build up sets and things like this. There's a heavy dice drafting element to it, so selecting dice in order to take actions, and the numbers on the dice and the number of dice in the space dictates what type of action you can achieve, and so on. The theme is not hugely interwoven into the game as you'd expect in a strategy sort of Euro style game, but it's a nice theme. I really like the idea of running a hotel and the characters that come into it. It's all nicely drawn by Clemens Franz. It's a game with an odd turn order structure where, if you play first, then you're also going to play 8th, which means you've got to wait 7 turns before your next turn in a 4-player game. And so with larger player counts, if you're playing with slow players, it can drag a little bit. But actually, it's a game that works really, really well with 2 players or 3 players. I don't mind playing it with 4 as long as I'm playing with the right people. I found it's a puzzle that just works with my brain. Something about my brain just clicks with it. That doesn't mean I always win, but it means I understand what's going on. I know what levers I need to pull, what strategies I need to try. And I just think it's a lovely example of Euro games. It fits in well with all that. If you like games by Uwe Rosenberg and those sort of things, then you'll probably enjoy this one. This is from the same designers as the designers of Tzolk'in, or some of them at least. There's a big pool of designers who've designed these games. Tzolk'in and Marco Polo, and a bunch of really popular designs that have come out over recent years. So I have a lot of fondness for Grand Austria Hotel. Number 22 is another Euro game. This is Bruges from Stefan Feld. This is a game that is full of different characters. Every card has a different character on it, and every character has a different ability. The cards are multi-use. You can use them to in all sorts of different ways. Discard them to get new little people. To use them to flip them over to become a building, or spend money to make them a character. But you've got to put them into a building. Some of them have straight up actions that happen the moment you play them. Others will have an action that happens every single round, or something that's an effect that's always an ability that you now have as a player. Some of them are for endgame scoring. There's a whole bunch of little, clearly with a Stefan Feld game, it's always going to be like this, loads of different interwoven mechanisms, and you can generate points all over the place. But I just find this game has so much personality and so much variety, because every single card is unique. It's one of my very favourite Euro games. I've been to the city Bruges, so on a couple of occasions. I have some fondness for it because of that, although really this could be any city anywhere. There's a good degree of take that in the game if you want to play it like that, if you choose to use those cards, but you might choose not to. Just loads of variety. I just find it's another one, a bit like Grand Austria Hotel, it's another one that just works for me. The puzzle just makes sense, and I enjoy the options that it provides me with. Number 21 couldn't be much more different. This is Rock, Paper, Wizard from WizKids. This is a pure take that game, okay? This is just a game of, essentially it's a simultaneous action game. We talked about Libertalia earlier. Here we're casting spells on each other, and the way you do it is by going rock, paper, wizard, and then do some sort of motion with your hand, and you'll have various different spells that are laid out on the table in any given round with hand gestures associated with them, and these spells are either going to push you ahead or push other players back, and you want to be at the front of the pack to get some of that gold. It's a game that plays really quickly. It looks fantastic when players are all pointing at each other and doing different motions and different spells, and some spells you do will counter other people's spells. It's total chaos, silly fun, simple rule set. It just makes everybody laugh. This was another one I talked previously about my experience with WizKids, because I haven't played a huge number of WizKids games, but they created my game Throne, which is also quite a chaotic take that style game where you can really attack the other players, and there's loads of variety, different cards laid out every round, which makes every round slightly different. And Rock Paper Wizard is very much like that too. It's a simpler rule set than Throne. It takes a little bit less to learn to play Rock Paper Wizard, but I love that chaotic sort of fun. I've seen recently that there is a wrestling retheme of Rock Paper Wizard, a WWE, I think it is, retheme of Rock Paper Wizard that came out earlier this year. So I'll certainly be looking up that one and trying to get hold of a copy. Okay, so let's see what that's done to the leaderboard. So starting with the publishers, what we know is that between 31 and 100, Rio Grande and Zock Verlag were in the lead with 5 games each, and then Matago, Hans im Glück and Schmidt-Spieler were following. So what's happened now? Well, that's changed a little bit. Zock Verlag has pulled ahead with 6 games. Rio Grande and Hans im Glück now equal on 5. Matago, Schmidt-Spieler have been met by Games Workshop and Lookout. Who would have thought Games Workshop would be on my top 100 games? To be honest, I wouldn't even have guessed that. But I was a big Games Workshop fan when I was a teenager, and so some of that nostalgia is coming back, I guess. Then with regards to designers, so now moving down to 31 to 100, Phil Walker-Harding, Andreas Seyfarth, Rainer Knizia and Wolfgang Kramer. And now at 21 to 100, Rainer Knizia and Wolfgang Kramer are out ahead, with Phil Walker-Harding, Andreas Seyfarth and Michael Kiesling following on 3 apiece. So looking at themes, well, we had fantasy out ahead with 9, then anthropomorphic animals with 6, ancient world with 5. And actually, if you're looking at the numbers 31 to 100, you can see that if we add together regular animals and anthropomorphic animals into one category, then they're matching that fantasy. I've kept them apart because they're different things, really. Animals doing silly things and just animals living as animals, you know. But let's see what happens between 21 and 100. Well, fantasy is ahead still with 10 games. And then we've got the ancient world with 7, anthropomorphic animals with 6. If we add them up with the regular animals, then we're still at 10, we're still matching fantasy. But I've separated them out here. So we've got fantasy out ahead with 10 games. Looking at game styles, between 31 and 100, we had tile laying ahead with 9 games, then time pressure with 7. So there's still space there for that to change. Let's see what happens. Tile laying pushes further ahead. Tile laying is now at 11 games in the 80 that we've looked at so far, and then time pressure and area majority at 7 apiece. Very different games, aren't they? Time pressure and area majority. You know, playing games at speed, that's more of a party type thing. Area majority really suggests sitting down and strategic thinking, competitive type gameplay, serious gameplay. Same with network building and engine building. So it is quite an eclectic mix of games that we have here. Okay, well, thanks very much for watching. The next video will be numbers 11 to 20.